I will finish the job if it takes me the rest of my life. 8 years later, Lawrence was paroled for good behavior, and so of course this terrified Mary, who
That makes no sense. These laws are bonkers, bro. He would have got the chair instantly. Injection, guillotine, whatever you need, he better receive.
Later, in the void.
What's going on, everyone? It's your boy Savvy. Welcome back to the Savvy Show. And in today's episode, we're diving deep into another video from MrBallen. And this one looks pretty juicy, guys. This video is called "This Man is the Reason the Death Penalty Exists." Mature audience only. So after reading that, I have a pretty good feeling this is going to be a very serious and scary one. I'm really excited. I want to see what this is all about. If you guys are excited for this reaction alongside with me and you guys have been joining them thus far, let me know by smashing that like button for me, guys. It takes less than a second. It's 100% free and mean the world. And also smash that sub button and join the family. I'm telling you, I make content like this all the time, so this will be the best place to be on the tube to enjoy that heat. And remember to hit that bell so you do not miss an upload, and let me know in the comment section below what you thought about this story. So with that being said, without any further ado, let's get this show started. Alrighty, this man is the reason the death penalty exists. Mature audience only. You have been warned. Let's go. 5 hacks. Interesting title. Another warning sign?
in the 1960s
Jesus.
and 1970s, hitchhiking became very popular amongst young people in America. Hitchhiking is a form of transportation where you basically get rides from strangers.
Yep.
And so the way it works is a hitchhiker will stand on the side of a busy road and they'll extend their arm out and they'll kind of hold their thumb up, which signals to passing motorists that they want to hitchhike. That's the kind of universal
Can't
sign
imagine
for
doing that in
hitchhiking.
today's age.
And then a willing
Way
motorist,
too
when they
freaking
see a
dangerous.
hitchhiker, they'll pull up alongside and
my
offer a
God.
ride. Now, today, it seems unfathomably dangerous to just hop into a stranger's car, or conversely, for a motorist to pick up a random stranger on the side of the road. But back then, this was
many
considered
creeps
totally
nowadays.
normal and socially acceptable.
Well,
And
actually, there's still a lot of creeps back in the day then too, so I can't even say that, unfortunately.
with that in mind, on September 29th, 1978, a 15-year-old girl named Mary Vincent was
15
standing
years
on the
old.
side of a highway just outside of Modesto, California, which is not far from San Francisco, California. Mary was a rebellious teenager
there?
who had recently run away from her home in Las Vegas, Nevada. Her parents were going through a very nasty divorce, and she just couldn't stand to be in the house anymore, and so that's why she had run away. And so she had
ran
hitchhiked
away.
all the way
Wow.
up to Los Angeles, California, where her grandfather lived. But after only being there for a couple of days, she became unbelievably homesick and wanted to go back and be around her parents and her family. And so one day when her grandfather was out, she slipped out of his house and she began hitchhiking
Dang,
back
she's sneaking
to
out
Las Vegas,
everywhere.
Nevada. And so she had hitchhiked
Oh my
from
God.
Los Angeles to Modesto, California. That's where the first person was willing to drive her to. And so she was on that strip of highway in Modesto looking for another ride that could take her farther south. She was on this highway with 2 other young hitchhikers. They all had these signs that said going south. So they weren't just holding their thumbs out, they were holding these signs. And so the 3 of them are huddled in a group. They're holding their signs up. And at some point, mid-afternoon, this light blue passenger van that only had 1 passenger, it was the driver. He was a 50-something-year-old man. He looked pretty harmless. He pulled over when he saw their sign.
Real photo of a similar style van. Okay, it's not the actual van because it's blue.
And he parked on the side of the road.
And honestly, when you see vans like that, well, nowadays, back in the days, probably wasn't so apparent because all the movies and stuff. This is a creeper van. Like, I'm just being honest. You don't get in these whatsoever. But I mean,
15 feet ahead of where they were. And so Mary's companions stayed where they were, and Mary ran up to this light blue van, and she looked through the passenger side window, which had been rolled down, and she asked this guy, hey, can you give all 3 of us a ride? We're going south.
let's see.
And this man, he would look at her and say, I can only give you a ride. I can't give the other 2 a ride. I can only give you a ride. And so
Hella
Mary's confused
sus.
because she's looking at this guy and she's seeing all this space in his van, and she's thinking to herself, you know, why am I
Red
only allowed
flags,
to go
bro.
when they're going the same place I'm going and there's plenty of room in this van?
Already red flags.
But
She's not
when
even
she
in the
kind
van.
of gently prodded this man and said, well, you know, are you sure you don't mind taking them too? He just said, look, I will take you, I will not take them. And so Mary said, okay, well, hold on, let me go back and get my bag.
This dude got a whole van, but he could only take 1 little 15-year-old girl. Y'all know what I'm thinking. I wish I didn't have to be thinking about this, but bruh, this boy better get on, man. Hopefully she's smart enough to not go.
And so he stays parked. She leaves the van and she runs back to the other two people she was with. And,
but to be honest, if she doesn't go, it doesn't make a good story, unfortunately. So I think she has to.
She explains the situation and they tell her, Mary, this is not good. There's clearly something off with this guy. But
Yeah.
Mary, even though she too shared this kind of reservation about this guy, she was so desperate to get home. She was so homesick that she couldn't face the idea of having to wait around for another ride, which might not come until the next day or the day after, because not every motorist is willing to pick up hitchhikers.
I mean,
and she
gotta
just
go
did
with your
not
gut,
want
though.
to wait any longer. And so she told her companions that, guys, I'm going to take the ride. And so she says goodbye to her two friends, she grabs her bag, and she runs back up to the van, and she hops in the passenger seat.
I mean, that can make sense too. She's 15 years old. She probably just misses home. She's not really thinking straight. She's just tired. So that makes sense. Like, if it was from an adult perspective, I would be like, yo, nah. And I'm assuming the two people she was with was older than her. I'm just assuming. Because that's probably why you didn't want to take them, because it'll be a lot harder to do something with 3 people in the car compared to just 1.
As soon as she sat down and closed the door, this man pulled back out onto the road and started driving, and then he turned and looked at Mary and introduced himself. His name was Lawrence Singleton, and he was
Looks
50
like a
years
creep,
old.
bro.
And then Mary, she introduced herself,
This
and they had
little
some small
dweeb.
talk. And very quickly, Mary feels at ease around Lawrence. He kind of reminded her of her grandfather. He was very nice, very polite. And so when she started
I'm
to
not
feel
buying it.
tired
He's playing a
early
role.
on in their trip, she said, "Hey, Lawrence, do you mind if I doze off while you drive?" And Lawrence would say, "No problem. Go ahead. Go to sleep." And so Mary turned away from Lawrence and kind of curled up on the seat, and pretty quickly she was asleep. A little while later, when she woke up, she looked out the window and immediately could tell they were going the wrong way. So she turns to Lawrence and
Oh
says,
my
going the
God.
wrong way. And Lawrence would say, "Oh, you know what? I made a mistake. I'll get us turned around. Sorry about that. I had no idea."
But I hope she's not buying that. Please tell me she's not buying that. At least not let him know you're on his case, because you're already in his van. Just keep it cool, but try to think about how you're going to skedaddle out of there. Yeah, for real, for real.
But Mary's thinking to herself, we're really far in the wrong direction. And there's no way he accidentally did this. But she kind of bit her tongue,
Okay.
because Lawrence would actually turn around and start going in the right direction.
Oh.
And so they're traveling in the proper direction for a little while, and Mary's totally on edge, but she's careful not to give that off to Lawrence because she doesn't really know this guy. And even though he did make her feel comfortable, she just doesn't really know what his intentions are.
Yeah.
And so she's just kind of looking around pretty apprehensively. And then they pull into this stretch of highway that kind of ran through this fairly forested area where very few cars were on this stretch of road. And Lawrence suddenly tells Mary that he wants to pull over because he has to go to the bathroom. He wants to relieve himself. And so Mary kind of apprehensively says, "Yeah, okay, that's fine." And so as Lawrence is beginning to pull off of the highway, Mary happens to look down at her feet, and she notices one of her shoes is untied. And instinctually, Mary just thought to herself,
I wonder if he
"I
did
better
that when
make
she was
sure that shoe
sleeping."
gets tied because I might need to run away from this guy." But she didn't want to reach down and start tying her shoe. It was kind of awkward because the space was small, and she was worried it would be kind of suspicious if she did it. And so she thought, okay, as soon as we pull off, I'll get out of the car and I'll tie my shoe. And so Lawrence, he pulls over, but he doesn't just pull over onto the shoulder of this road. Instead, he pulls into this access road that kind of trails into the forest. And so as soon as he turned onto this road, the alarm bells are going off in Mary's head. She knows something is wrong,
Yeah.
but she doesn't really know what to say to Lawrence because he's not talking to her, and she doesn't really want to look at him. And so she's just kind of going over in her head what she's going to do. Is she going to run? Is she going to confront him? She doesn't know. And then eventually, after about a minute or so, when they are far enough away from the main road that no one on that road could see them, they're pretty far into this forest, Lawrence stops the car and he hops out to go relieve himself. And immediately, Mary, she hops out of the car too, and she bends down to tie her shoe. Before she could finish tying her shoe, suddenly something smacked her hard in the back of the head, and it knocked her unconscious.
Bruh.
It was Lawrence. He had hid a hammer next to his seat, and when he had
Yo!
gotten out, he did not go relieve himself. Instead, he walked around the vehicle
Is she already out?
and smashed her in the head. When Mary came to, she realized she was laying down in the back of the van, and as she was looking out the windows, she could see that they were still parked out in the middle of the forest. And then when she tried to move, she realized her hands, her feet, everything had been tied down to the van. She couldn't move.
Damn.
And so as she's wondering what's going on, Lawrence comes around. He opens the back doors to this van.
She's waiting to wake her up?
Hops inside, and he
Waiting for her
begins
to wake up?
assaulting her. Mary has no idea what to do. She's a 15-year-old kid.
What kind of assault?
And this guy is on top of her. He's not stopping. And so she just began quietly begging him to please stop. Set me free. I won't tell anyone. She just kept repeating that over and over and over again. And Lawrence never spoke back. He just continued the assault for hours and hours. Finally, when Lawrence got tired, he got...
She's 15. Man, there's a lot of creeps out there in the world, honestly. This is sad.
Off of Mary, and he climbed out of the back of the truck, and he went around and he climbed into one of the front seats, and he fell asleep. And so Mary probably tried to free herself from her restraints, but there was nothing she could do. The restraints were tied too tightly, and so for hours she must have just laid there wondering what was going to happen to her. And then at some point in the middle of the night, Lawrence wakes up again, and without saying a word to Mary, he just climbs out of the van and gets into the driver's seat, and then drives the van out of the forest. He drives on the main road for a little while until he turns down another access road that takes them away from the main road, so away from any prying eyes, and he comes to a stop somewhere out in this forest in the middle of this big canyon. Lawrence parks the van, he climbs out and walks around to the back. He opens up the back doors where Mary is laying there whimpering and crying and begging to be set free. He climbs inside, and her torture continues for hours and hours until the sun finally came up.
Hours?
At which point Lawrence stopped. He climbed out of the back of the van.
Until the sun came up again? Bro, this boy's on some other shit.
And he's standing out there, and he turns around, so he's facing Mary, and he reaches in, and he undoes her restraints. So he frees her, he pulls her out of the van, and stands her up on the ground. And so she's crying, she's beaten, she's bloodied, she doesn't know what's going on. And she just gently says to him, "Please set me free." And he says, "Oh, you want to be set free? I'll set you free." And so he walks around this totally destroyed 15-year-old girl, and he reaches into the back of his van where there's this
just set her
toolbox,
free, though.
and he pulls out a hatchet. And so he walks back, and he's standing in front of Mary, and Mary would have had a fraction of a second to see what was in his hand before, in one fluid motion, he reaches and grabs her left arm with his left hand. He grabs her on the wrist, then he raises his hatchet up, brings it down on her left forearm, severing her arm off right below the elbow. And so Mary falls backwards to the ground, and she looks down at where her left arm just was. She's in shock, and before she can do anything, Lawrence just walks over, and with his left hand again, he reaches over and grabs her right wrist. And now Mary knows what he's about to do.
Yo, he's chopping her up in pieces now.
And so she's screaming, and she's kicking him as hard as she can to try to get him off of her, but his grip is too strong. And then he begins to chop at her right forearm over and over again. It would take 4 hard blows to finally sever her right arm.
You took 4 blows?
Her body. And so Mary falls to the ground in a heap. She's bleeding profusely. She's screaming in agonizing pain. And all Lawrence can focus on is that one of Mary's amputated hands was clutched on to his left arm. When he cut off her left hand, it had gripped onto his arm, and now it was stuck to him. And
the nerves and everything is so probably somewhat attached or whatever. What the heck? That is pretty creepy.
Very nonchalantly, he began trying to flick this hand off of his arm. And then finally, when it did come off, he turned and looked at Mary and realized she had gone silent, and she was limp, and she was laying in a huge pool.
Is she dead?
And so Lawrence put the bloody hatchet back inside of his van, and then he just walked
This happened way too quick. It was 0 to 100, no cap. She lost both of her arms in a matter of seconds. So it seemed. But time probably went by so slow for her. I can't imagine just like... Oh, I literally can't imagine. So let's just keep it going.
And grabbed her and began dragging her. About 100 feet down the road from the van was a culvert. A culvert is a big tunnel that goes underneath roads. It allows water and runoff to pass by the road without damaging it. And so this particular culvert underneath this access road was built about 30 feet below the surface.
I had no idea what those were called.
And so if you were standing on the road over the area where this culvert was, if you walked to the edge of the road on either side, there would be a 30-foot drop-off down to the opening of this culvert on either side. And so Lawrence dragged Mary all the way over to this section of the road over the culvert, and then chucked her lifeless body off the side, smashing it down onto the rocks below. And then Lawrence walked around very carefully all the way down to her body and stuffed her inside of the actual culvert.
Wait, oh, so this is the actual real photo of the culvert. So is she dead though? She must be dead for falling from that height. With 2 arms gone?
And as he was walking away, he said to her, "Now you're free." After Lawrence left, Mary should have been dead. Really, she should have died at several points along this attack. But miraculously, Mary did not die. And in fact, she would later say she vividly remembered the entire attack. She was fully lucid, fully conscious, fully aware for the entire thing, save for the moment when she was knocked unconscious by the hammer.
But wasn't she knocked out after she got her arms cut off? And she was aware about...
So she vividly remembered having her arms amputated, and she specifically remembered one particular point in the beginning before her left arm, the first arm, had been amputated. He grabbed her left wrist, and she in turn instinctively grabbed with her left hand onto his left arm. So she's clutching onto him, and so when he came down and cut her arm off, she began falling backwards, but she remembered thinking to herself, "Why am I falling backwards? I just grabbed onto his arm. I had a firm grip." And then as she's falling, it's like time is standing still. She literally saw her hand still clutching his arm and saw it had been cut off of her body.
Oh my
and then
God,
when Lawrence cut off her right arm, despite being in agonizing pain, it's like she instinctively understood that she has to pretend to be dead. Otherwise, she will die. And so she went totally limp, her eyes were half open, and she watched as Lawrence is flicking her left hand, the one that she thought she had gripped onto when she was falling back. She watched as he shook that hand off of his arm. And then she was limp as he grabbed her and dragged her the 100 feet to the culvert. And she was limp and still and didn't make a sound when he threw her 30 feet down onto jagged rocks, and she broke 4 of her ribs. She was in excruciating pain.
She didn't make one sound, not one peep. A 15-year-old girl. Man, she is really tough. I can't imagine anyone doing that. Not even being 15, like being an adult, not saying anything.
But her will to survive was telling her, make no sound, take this punishment, and you will survive. And then after he left, she remembers thinking, you know, I don't know where he is. He could be waiting up on the road for me. I can't just crawl out and try to save myself because then he might actually finish me off. And so she laid in this culvert in this horrible position, totally contorted, with her arms gone and broken ribs. And then finally, after a while, she started to feel exceptionally tired, and that was from blood loss. And she said there was a voice in her head telling her, you can't go to sleep. If you go to sleep, you're going to die. And if you die, we can't catch this monster, and he's going to do this to someone else. And so she had this surge of adrenaline where she decided, I'm going to live. I'm going to get out of here. I don't know if he's still up there, but I have to get out and I have to try to save myself. And so somehow she got out of the culvert. And then once she was on the ground, she dug the nubs of her arms into the dirt and attempted to pack the wound with dirt and mud. And then afterwards...
She's doing this as a little kid. Like, imagine how bad that's stinging her. Let alone just being in shock, seeing your arms being gone.
She raised her arms up over her head because she didn't want the blood and muscles to fall out. And so with her mutilated arms up over her head, she managed to crawl up this embankment up onto the road. She's got no clothes on. She's covered head to toe in blood. She's in shock. And she starts running down the highway. And a car would actually come by fairly quickly, but they were so startled at what they were seeing, they didn't stop and they drove on.
Honestly, I wouldn't blame them to be startled in the beginning. Like, I wouldn't believe what I'm seeing too, but after like actually realizing, yo, this is a legit real girl, probably 15, that's missing both of her arms, I would have stopped. But I would have definitely been spooked in the beginning, probably kept on going a little bit. And after looking, I would have figured it out.
And so Mary,
but hindsight's 2020 though,
would ultimately run 3 miles on this highway before finally flagging down a passing motorist. It happened to be a young couple.
Flagged them down without any arms. Man, I need to stop with this.
They got over the initial shock of what Mary actually looked like. They put her inside of their car and they sped to the hospital. Mary would stay in the hospital for a month, and during that time, she would give police all this information about her attacker, about Lawrence Singleton. And using her very detailed description of him, the police were able to come up with a very good composite sketch. and Lawrence
Literally
Singleton's
looks like a
neighbor
pedo.
happened to see that sketch, and they turned him in. Lawrence was ultimately sentenced to 14
Got
years
turned
in
in by your
prison for
neighbor.
what he did to Mary. It was the maximum sentence that the judge could give. The
14?
judge wanted to do more, but legally they couldn't.
14? That was the legal limit? Oh my, I'm learning so much in this video. Now I understand where the title came from. Yo, this man is the reason the death penalty exists, bro. Legit.
And so Mary, she testified at court. And so after it all ended and he was sentenced, Mary was leaving the courthouse. And as she passed by Lawrence, it was the one time she had to be physically close to him, he turned and kind of leaned into her and said, "I will finish the job if it takes me the rest of my life." 8 years later, Lawrence was paroled for good behavior. And so, of course, this terrified Mary, who...
That makes no sense. Parole after good behavior after you almost attempted to kill someone? These laws are bonkers, bro. He would have got the chair instantly. Injection, guillotine, whatever you need. He better receive. Honestly.
Who by now had become a wife, and she had 2 sons, and so she's worried that now that this guy is free, he's going to come and finish the job. But Lawrence would not go after Mary. Instead, 10 years after he got out on parole, he would attack another woman, a 31-year-old mother of 3 named Roxanne Hayes, and unfortunately, he would kill her. At Roxanne's murder trial, Mary would actually testify against Lawrence, and her testimony is what they used to secure a death sentence for Lawrence. But before he could be executed, Lawrence died of cancer in jail in 2001.
Oh
When Mary heard that
you
Lawrence
kidding
had
me?
died, she felt very cheated. However, her sons were very relieved to find out that her attacker had died, and so she took some solace in that. Outrage over Lawrence's early release, considering what he did to Mary,
Taken out by
and the
cancer.
fact that that early release
Karma,
led to
though.
another person being killed, led to the creation of the Lawrence Singleton Bill, which gives judges the ability to give 25-year to life sentences in cases that involve torture. Meaning, under this bill, Lawrence would never
Look at this
have gotten out of
dude.
prison after what he did to Mary. So that's going to do it, guys.
Oh my
if you got
God.
something out of today's episode and you have not done this already, please sneak into the like button's house in the middle of the night and unplug their iPhone while it's going through a software update. Also,
Oh my
please
God. I love those little things that he does in the beginning and end of the videos. Oh my God. Yo, if you guys enjoyed this reaction, God, I enjoyed this video. This was crazy. Legit. Almost one of my favorite ones that I covered on his channel. There's a lot of them too, so this is the one that pretty much surprised me a lot throughout this whole episode. And that takes a lot sometimes, because I'm usually kind of honest sometimes, but whatever. Yo, if you guys enjoyed it though, please remember to smash that like button for me. Also smash that sub button and hit that bell so you stay plugged for each and every upload. And let me know in the comment section below what you thought about this video, because I want to hear you guys are so surprised just like I was. So with that being said, unfortunately that concludes today's episode. However, I'll catch you guys on the next one.